Lord, I thank you for Stan and for Kelly and for just the years of accumulated wisdom and compassion that they are bringing to us this morning. Thank you for the time that they've spent in the last week or two as well, dedicating themselves to sharing to us. And I just pray that your Spirit would speak through them and we would hear what we need to hear. Thank you for your love and your care that just reaches out to each one of us wherever we are this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Over to you, Kelly.
Hi, everyone. So as you know, my name is Kelly and I'm the practice manager / leader of the Hope Counselling service. And today we're talking about Jeremiah through the lens of trauma. And so before we take a deep dive into Jeremiah's experience that's going to be led by Stan, I just want to talk about the particular way that we're going to be looking at this today. So as we're navigating this season of being off the map and we're exploring it through the lens of trauma today, as Joy said, you may notice that some difficult things come up for you. And so there's a slide that will come up. There it is. So I want to set a ground rule, which is basically exactly what Joy said. So a ground rule for this morning's talk, because trauma can trigger people, it can trigger us. Many of us would have experienced different kinds of trauma in life. Many people are talking about this pandemic as a collective trauma. And so this morning we ask that you be mindful of your own self-care, whether you're here in the building or you're at home. So do whatever you need to do to take care of yourselves, whether that's taking a break, leaving the room, eating some chocolate, talking to someone you trust. You know, do whatever you need to help you stay present. So that's the ground rule. Secondly is context. So it's important that we acknowledge the enormity of the impact of this pandemic, the impact that it's been having on our lives and is still having. I think that we can say that this has been a collective trauma. This virus has threatened our lives and continues to do that, and it's taken lives. We have been a threat to each other. There's been a lot of fear, and many of our internal and external resources have been unavailable to us, which has made it really hard for us to cope. Some people will need some professional help to help them work through the impact of the pandemic. And many of us will, given the right conditions, will bounce back. We'll have the resilience to bounce back and we won't have any long-term problems. So I'm not wanting to pathologize those of us who have struggled in the past 15 months, feels like longer, because that would be all of us. All of us have struggled. But let us bring this trauma lens and awareness to the way that we listen today and get up close to Jeremiah's experience to see what we notice of God and what he might be saying to us. And then just briefly speaking to the word trauma and giving it some kind of definition so that we know what we're talking about. It's a big word with a particular meaning. And it's becoming one of those words that has a tendency to be overused, in my humble opinion. And so I want to offer the briefest definition, which might be extreme stress that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope. And then on the next slide, just briefly, different kinds of trauma that we're talking about here. So people may develop PTSD after which is post-traumatic stress disorder, after a single one-off event that has felt life-threatening, either directly or indirectly. So that may be a natural disaster or a car crash, a criminal assault, rape. Developmental trauma or early relational trauma comes from a cumulative effect of some level of abuse or neglect growing up. And sometimes that's really obvious, and sometimes it's quite subtle. Complex trauma is a combination of those two, so somebody has both. Vicarious trauma can develop, if we're not careful, when we're supporting others who are experiencing trauma. So we can find that we're experiencing the symptoms that they are. And this is something that counsellors need to be especially aware of, and it applies to all of us in different helping roles. Secondary trauma can develop when the level of care that we've received after we've experienced something traumatic has been really poor. So, for example, an aid worker has been raped out in the field, and the organisation that she works for has not provided the care and support that she needed, hasn't given the sense of safety that she needed. Any and all of these types of trauma can lead to fight, flight, and freeze responses, which are our best attempt at trying to survive something that's life-threatening, something that feels unbearable, and we can become like a meerkat on alert for danger, looking out for what's to come. And so this is our lens for today, trauma. I'm going to hand over to Stan now as we get up close to Jeremiah's experience.
Thank you, Kelly. Good, you can hear me clearly. It's great to be here. My name is Stan, and my wife and I, Jill, who's here with us today as well, live across in Dunfermline, and I'm part of the team at Liberty Church, and so they send their greetings to you this morning. I'm really privileged to be here this morning. I count CCE as a spiritual home for me, even though this is only the third time I've actually come here on a Sunday morning. I've been related to CCE for 16, 17 years, and mainly through Rupert. I was part of a team leading a church in Carlisle, and through Joy, I met Rupert, and Rupert really kindly stepped in and brought some support and some mentoring for me. And we've carried on relationship all those years. We went from there to Reading, and then we came back here to Scotland. And so I'm thankful for Rupert, but I'm also thankful for you as a community, because I know that Rupert is actually just reflecting something of the generosity that you want to have here, not only to your local community, but to churches and to communities around Scotland. So thank you. And so it's a real privilege to come and speak. As I say, my wife and I have been married. We're married, and we've been married for 20 years this summer. And we've got 2 kids who aren't here, that with Joy and with Charles this morning. And as Joy just told some stories about when she was small, if you want to imagine what Joy was like, it's just like looking at Annalise. They just look so similar, the little hair. I mean, especially Joy's hair never got as long as Annalise's hair is now, but those little ringlets, absolutely beautiful. And so it's great joy to be able to share the stage with Joy this morning. We've had many blessings throughout our married life. We've also had our fair share of struggles, as we all have. Both Jill and I have suffered from chronic fatigue at points of our lives, and Jill suffers from mental ill health. And the pandemic for us has been one of the darkest periods that we have ever been through, particularly for Jill. And it's amazing to think that we're here today. I think 7 months ago, if we had said to both of us whether we'd be here this morning, we wouldn't necessarily have shared that same optimism. So we come this morning wounded, but a sense of healing and God's purpose and restoration, that we're on a journey towards that. So it's exciting to be sharing part of your Off the Map series. As a geographer, I went and did geography at undergraduate level. I'm always thinking, well, how can we map it? But that we'll maybe do some of that. And yet we want to maintain that mystery, don't we, of what God's calling us to. So my journey with Jeremiah, I came up here 7 years ago after we've been down Reading, and I came at a point where I've been in church ministry for, I think, 10 years by that point, and there was a sense that was more that I need to explore, and that my kind of evangelical tradition I'd come up with had many benefits. I'm thankful for that, but there's a sense that I needed to explore something more, and I had a chance to study at ICC biblical interpretation. In particular, I felt there was something more of the richness of the Bible that I hadn't unpacked and hadn't had a chance to do. And so for my dissertation, I had a chance to look at Jeremiah as part of that. I then carried on my studies of Jeremiah by going to St. Andrews and doing a PhD, which I sadly didn't manage to complete due to my chronic fatigue. So I'm kind of started the journey, but didn't finish it. But I love the years I spent wrestling with Jeremiah. And I want to suggest to you that's what you do. You don't read Jeremiah, you wrestle with Jeremiah. And my hope for this morning is in just what I'm talking about is two things. Number one, that I would maybe give you some tools, some encouragement, and some directions of how you might too start to wrestle with Jeremiah. And the second thing I want to do is unpack one specific passage, one prayer of Jeremiah for his moment in the abyss, and how that might be our prayer, our liturgy, when the world feels like it's come to an end. Walter Brueggemann, who some of you might recognize, a great commentator across the whole of the Old Testament, said that Jeremiah is a meditation on the abyss. I think that's a great summary for what this book is. Now, if I asked you, each one of you, what you knew about Jeremiah, or if I asked myself a few years ago, I might have been able to tell you a couple of things. Maybe the famous verse, for you know the plans I have for you, plans to give you a future and a peace. Maybe one day I'll come back and tell you a bit more and put you some context about that verse, but that's the verse that everyone knows. I might also be able to tell you that there was a grumpy man called Jeremiah, if you've read the book of Jeremiah. But let me tell you a few more things about this book. Number one, it will be maybe a surprise to most of you that Jeremiah is the longest book in the Old Testament. So it's longer than the Psalms. Psalms have got more chapters, but Jeremiah has more words. I just realized I'm standing in the wrong place. I hope that's not been a problem for anybody. Oh, fantastic. Well, I'll stand here and then you can tell me whether you want me to go anywhere else. So the longest book in the Old Testament. It's also the book with the most amount of biographical information about the prophet. So when we think of an Old Testament prophet, we're actually thinking about Jeremiah. That's probably our best estimation of what we're thinking of. The book of Jeremiah was in the Jewish tradition and much of a Christian tradition was seen as the principal, the king of the Old Testament prophets. Now, I think when I grew up, and the place that we know, the material we know best of the Old Testament prophets is Isaiah. And that's principally because of the prophecy that relate to Jesus. And I just think the book is more accessible. That was certainly the way I got into the Old Testament prophets, was through the book of Isaiah. What we maybe not realize is that Jeremiah is seen as the greatest of Israel's poets. So the poetic material in this book and the book of Lamentations in terms of an artistry, and I think it's a fascinating thing that we could explore about art and trauma and challenge, which we haven't got today, but he is seen as one of the greatest poets. So why, in the light of all that, do we not read more of Jeremiah? Well, it's because it's like one massive big mess. I mean, just structurally, when you get into it, it's really difficult to get your head around this book. It starts with the birth and a call of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah just sort of, at the end, he doesn't really finish. He just kind of drifts off as a person. It doesn't know when to stop as a book. It has three endings. It just kind of just grinds to a halt. It's not chronological. So you're reading the story and you get these little bits of biography and a bit of story and a bit of history, and you think, that's fantastic, and I'm getting this. And then suddenly the person who you thought was dead reappears in the book. So that's confusing. Then there's all sorts of different types of literature. So there's biography about Jeremiah. There's history. There's a letter or two. There's oracles of that prophecy. There are poems and there are confessions. So just in terms of that, there's all these different types of material in the book. And then I think probably most challenging for us as we enter into the territory of Jeremiah is the heartbreaking violence, anger, pain that we encounter in it. I mean, particularly the violent that is problematic in terms of its theology. The pictures of God who intentionally brings violence and anger against his people is problematic. And we don't have time to go into that today. But that sort of anger and frustration, that violence, does make it difficult for us to get into it. So I want to just start off by maybe exploring why that might be. Now, if you've read the book, you might know that it's written in the period before, during, and after the destruction of Jerusalem. So just telling you that tells you enough to tell you that's not a pleasant experience to go through. But it wasn't until I started to really unpack what was going on at that time and what Israel thought of itself and God, that I began to understand how difficult an experience that could have been. So let me say this in summary, and you could add an awful lot, but I want to say that Israel's identity at this point, and already there's a sense that actually there's a northern and a southern kingdom, so we haven't got time to go into that. So we're talking about Judah, but I'm going to use the word Israel for the whole nation. So Israel's sense of identity is based around a few foundations. They were the people of God, and we know that story from Exodus. They were the people who were called out of the greatest civilization the world had ever seen at that point, Egypt. They were slave people, and they were called out of God, called out of slavery by God. So they're the people of God. And they're given and they live in the land of God, the land that God has given them. And they're guarded and bound by the laws and the sacrificial system they have, their worship of God. And the culmination of that whole idea, and central to it all, was the temple in Jerusalem. Because the temple is a geographical place in the midst of Israel. The temple is the center of their worship. It's also their economic center, their cultural center, and their political center. But it's also where God lives. And I think this is one of the things we find difficult to imagine today. That they believe that God didn't just live in the temple in some sort of metaphorical way or symbolic way or metaphysical way. They believed that he lived in the temple. He was present like the cloud when they were in the desert, like the pillar of fire. He was present amongst them. So once we get this idea of their identity and the things they thought about themselves and about God, you can imagine what the experience of what they went through would have been like. Because the Babylonian army came, they destroyed the city of Jerusalem. So that's one thing. And they took a whole chunk of people in exile to another land. But most grievously, they destroyed the temple. And at that time, when a foreign army came and took another city and destroyed their center of worship, that act was a God-killing act. So when you did it, you said, we've beaten that God. So when this people who've been taken out of their land and taken hundreds of miles to Babylon, and their temple is gone, and their land is gone, their economy is gone. And the question is, well, who are we? And is our God dead? This is the end of the world for this people. And I think it's once we get our head around that we begin to understand what this book is speaking out of. And that, for me, is why this book and trauma helps, because I think it is a book that is created in the midst of a traumatic experience. And I think it can help us as we face trauma and difficulties, because we find voice for our prayers in the midst of that. And that's why I want to explore next. So Joy said that we're brother and sister. I've also got another brother, Daniel, and Krista, and we were brought up in the Middle East. As Joy also said, she was taken to Egypt, but we lived in Bahrain, so a small island of Saudi Arabia. And I was there from when I was from 1 to 8. I was born in the UK. Joy was born in Bahrain. And I don't have huge amounts of memories of my time there, but I do remember one day very, very clearly. We started off at breakfast, and my mum told us some sad news. She said that her stepfather had died. And she had lost her biological father at the age of 12 in a really surprising moment. There was no expectation that was going to happen. And her mother then married another man called Pa, who was a great benefit and like a lovely man, and it meant an awful lot to my mum. And I had only met him a few times because we lived in the Middle East, so we'd gone back for holidays. I can remember his big hands, his big square face, and a lovely smile. But at the age of 5, when you get told that this man you've only met a few times died, you just go, okay, can I have some more toast? And then when can we play football? It didn't register for me at all. But later on, it did. Because we got in the car, and I think my mum was taking us to school. We drove, and we were parking, and she had this minor bump. It wasn't an accident, it was just while we were parking, so really low speed. And she just broke down in tears, and she was sobbing. And I'm the oldest, and my dad wasn't in the car. I was going, what is going on? I remember it. I kept thinking, I'm sure I'd seen my mum cry, but I'd never seen this level of distress in her. And then she explained to me, she said, as the tears subsided, she said, I'm just so sad because Pa has died. And for me, it was this kind of world-shattering event. And this, I suppose, why it's so memorable, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the age of 5, as you might know, like psychologists say that when kids are, when they grow up, they think they're the center of the universe. That's a natural part of it. And maybe as a 5-year-old boy, maybe even more so, I felt that I was the center of the universe. And so in this moment, I discovered that something could have such a significant impact on the person who I loved and knew the best in the world, alongside my father, that something that was nothing to do with me could have that impact on her. Cracked my idea that I was the center of the world. So there was that sense of this thing here. And also I saw in this moment a part of my mother, this interior life, this pain, this joys, the good memories she had, all that she had. I got a window into that I had never had before. This moment allowed me to see into this person who'd been central to my life in a new way. And I offer that story just as an introduction because I think that what we're going to look and read at last as we finish off is a prayer from Jeremiah. And in this prayer, we, in the midst of his woundedness, his anger, his faith, his faithlessness, his joy, and his joylessness, we get a chance to see into the heart of this man and into the heart of his moment. And as we enter into that, I think my prayer is that we get to see more of God and that we are given a liturgy, a prayer, a language for when we find ourselves in similar moments. This is the wound of Jeremiah that ushers us in. And I always think that these things are written down for a reason. These prayers and this liturgy is ours. This is part of our inheritance as the people of faith. And so I offer it to you. So this comes from Jeremiah 20 and starts at 7 and finishes at 18. These are part of Jeremiah's confessions. You deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I am ridiculed all day long. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I cry out, proclaiming violence and destruction. And so the word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long. But if I say I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones, and I am weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot. I hear many whispering terror on every side. Denounce him. Let's denounce him. All my friends are waiting for me to slip, saying, perhaps he'll be deceived. Then we'll prevail over him and take our revenge on him. But the Lord is with me like a mighty warrior. So my persecutors will stumble and not prevail. They will fail and be thoroughly disgraced. Their dishonor will never be forgotten. Lord Almighty, you who examine the righteous and probe the heart and mind, let me see your vengeance on them, for to you I have committed my cause. Sing to the Lord. Give praise to the Lord. He rescues the life of the needy from the hands of the wicked. Cursed be the day I was born. May the day my mother bore me not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought my father the news, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son. May that man be like the towns the Lord overthrew without pity. May he hear wailing in the morning, a battle cry at noon. for he did not kill me in the womb. With my mother as a grave, her womb enlarged forever. Why did I come out of the womb? To see trouble and sorrow, and to end my days in shame. A remarkable prayer. I don't think that deconstruction or logical dissection of these words seems appropriate in the midst of this heart cry. And so I just want to offer them to you. I want to offer you words that come to us at the end of this man's world, at the end of his life, the end of faith, possibly even the end of God. Words that shout over the desolation of the world, words that are full of fight and retribution, words that usher us into the presence of God, not with peace, not really with worship or hope, maybe not even with faith. In the face of a mighty God, we call a cry for justice, for vengeance, for mercy, for anything to stop the pain. These are the words of the faithless, faithful ones, who one moment can sing mighty anthems of praise to God and the next denounce the giver of life. These are the words of survivors, not conquerors. These are the words of the homeless, cast out ones. They find no peace in this world, and nor in their bodies, and they dream. Jeremiah dreams, this community dreams, only that it would stop. These are words that tear down and destroy, but they make space for what might grow in its place. These are the words at the end of the world that might usher in a new world. They call us to be attentive to ourselves, to our hopes, our dreams, our beliefs, our pain, our suffering, our doubt. And they call us to be attentive to the community, to those around us, in their promise and in their pain. And they call God to be attentive to us and to meet us in the wound. And in the wound and in the abyss, there is a connection. And my prayer and my hope is that from that meeting, from that communion, there may be a way to walk on. So may you take up your inheritance. This is part of your inheritance. My prayer is you never have to utter these words, that you never reach where Jeremiah does. But if you do, take these words that are given to you and pray them. And may you find God, and may you find yourselves as you meet him in the abyss. I'm going to hand over to Kelly.
Thank you, Stan. So before we return to thinking about trauma, let's just turn our attention inwards for a moment or two. Perhaps close your eyes if you feel comfortable, or lower your gaze. We've been thinking about Jeremiah's words, the words that he prays in the midst of trouble, in the midst of trauma. I wonder what your body is saying to you in response. Perhaps notice the pace and depth of your breathing, your heart rate. What thoughts are coming up for you? Or feelings? Anything else you notice? And now open your eyes, and we'll talk a little bit more about fight, flight, and freeze, which might be trauma responses you relate to. So someone experiencing a fight response might feel like they're on alert when trauma is triggered. When someone who's been through what Jeremiah has been through feels triggered, they feel on alert, unable to switch off because there might be danger. So they may experience intrusive memories in the form of flashbacks or nightmares. The flight response looks quite different. So here the person is likely to avoid anything that triggers the trauma. So they may find themselves numbing their experience through alcohol or substance abuse, or they may avoid certain places and people just so that they feel okay. The freeze response may look like depression, or it may look like someone just waiting until the danger has passed. The common thread to all three responses is that the nervous system is overwhelmed. And if we remember the initial definition that I offered, trauma is extreme stress that overwhelms a person's capacity to cope. The nervous system is overwhelmed, and all of these physiological and psychological responses are totally normal around trauma. And they would be incredibly normal in and around this pandemic. So if you're noticing that some of these symptoms are familiar for you, then that's understandable. I've been thinking how I can offer you support so that you can support others who are in distress. And I keep coming back to the importance of needing to stabilize ourselves. We cannot help others without this. Otherwise, we'll get swept up in the other person's distress. And in fact, Jesus commands us to love our neighbor as ourselves, which implies we need to love ourselves first. And so I'm suggesting three things to help ourselves, to help calm our nervous systems down if it feels under threat and fight, flight, freeze responses are around. So pausing first to check in with yourself, as we just did. What's happening inside me? How am I? Perhaps taking some deeper breaths. Next, I might acknowledge the things that I notice, so acknowledging my feelings. Oh, I actually feel quite stressed, going inside and meeting some friends. Acknowledging thoughts. Why are those people so anxious about meeting other people? Or my mind has gone blank, or I can't think properly. Often when we acknowledge what is happening inside, the physiological and psychological symptoms, they calm down because they've been seen. And then we might intentionally find some ways to stabilize ourselves so that our nervous system feels safe. So this may involve, it does involve anything that grounds us, anything that brings us back down to earth. And that looks different for all of us. So for some, it might look like yoga. For others, it might look like meditation or running, walking, gardening, dancing. Anything that doesn't require us to have to use our brains and think. And then how do we support others? So it can be really hard to know when we're trying to support someone, are they experiencing something, their situation from a place of trauma? Or are they in the midst of some other kind of distress? Another version of disorientation and loss? And we mostly don't know, so we need to err on the side of caution. And so I offer 6 suggestions to help us with this. So firstly, when helping others, it's important to try and stay grounded ourselves, taking some deep breaths, being aware of our surroundings, noticing the breeze in the trees or the smell of the coffee. Be an available support for your friend so that they know that they can reach out to you for company or to talk. Feeling connected to others is really important when someone's experienced trauma because it's an incredibly isolating and lonely experience. Acknowledge their feelings. So they may feel low or anxious, stressed, scared. Listen to them. But really importantly, don't force them to talk. Don't ask big, difficult questions because we risk re-traumatizing them and we don't want that. And keep checking in. So if someone has reached out to you, don't follow this with silence. Check in with them in the following days, see how they're doing, so that they know that you are there for them. And finally, help them to find support. So that might look like professional support, like a therapist, or it may be encouraging them to reach out to friends and family that feel safe, and helping them to ground themselves with the things that I've mentioned. So gardening, running, yoga. And of course, one of the resources we can offer to you is hope. And there are flyers on all of the tables, and I would encourage you to take them home with you and think if there's anyone who could benefit from some counselling, because we're here for you, and we're here for your friends and family in the local community. And finally, before we finish, I'm moving to a time of response. I am mindful that some difficult things may have come to mind, may have come up for you today. And so we're going to end today's talk by doing a grounding exercise together at home and here in the building, so that you get to experience this for yourself, and that collectively we get to calm down any nervous systems that have been activated. And it's called feet bum breath. It's going to be a couple of minutes, and I would encourage you to begin by sitting upright in your chairs with your feet flat on the floor. And if you feel comfortable, close your eyes or lower your gaze. So we'll begin by drawing our attention to our feet. Notice the contact the feet have with the floor. The contact the ground has with your feet. The way the ground is there supporting you. Maybe you can gently rock your feet from side to side so that you get to see how the ground is there supporting the full surface area of your feet. Gently press your toes to the ground and your heels. And come to a gentle resting position, just noticing the way the ground is supporting your feet. Take a deep breath and move your attention to your bum. Notice the contact your body has with the chair. Wiggle around a bit if you like, so that the full surface area of this part of your body makes contact with the chair. And notice how the chair is simply here supporting you. And take a deep breath and move your attention up the body to your breath. It can be tempting at this point to try and control the breath the moment your attention is on it. For now, just see if you can notice its natural rhythm. Notice how deeply your breath goes to your chest or to your diaphragm. Take a couple of breaths. I wonder if you're noticing trying to control the breath. It doesn't need you to do anything. Your breath was happily breathing for you, supporting you before you noticed it was there. And when you're ready, open your eyes and we'll come back together. So that's called feet bum breath, grounding ourselves, calming our nervous systems to help ourselves and to help others. And in this place of being deeply connected with ourselves, this is where God is too. God is deeply with us. I'm going to hand over to Toby now for our response song.